and I want to welcome you all. It's nice to see such a good turnout for our presentation tonight. Tonight we have two of the principals involved in the Painted Post water withdrawal decision. Rachel Treichler, a lawyer who represented the plaintiffs, and also Gene Wasinski, who is a noted geologist who will explain some of the geological aspects of the situation. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Rachel and Gene.
Gene, go
First, Gene.
I think that one of the things that Rachel wanted me to tell you about is how I happened to be involved in this case in Painted Post. They began by mentioning in the newspaper that Painted Post was considering selling some of their excessive water, their extra water that wasn't being used by Ingersoll Rand any longer. Wait a minute, it's not Ingersoll Rand right now, what is it? Dresser Rand, sorry. And so they thought they had surplus water. And I thought, hey, wait a minute. I had spent 5 years with the groundwater branch of the U.S. Geological Survey, and so I knew a little bit about water supplies and the diminishment of same. And I thought, well, I'll just go up and listen to what's going on there. And I did do that. If you want to do it also, and I hope you do, for goodness sake, go by the rules. I did not interrupt their meeting in any way. I listened to everything that I thought I could hear going on. There always is a little whispering going on that escapes an observer. But I thought it was not only important to be there and hear what they were discussing and how they were deciding what they were going to do about their excess water, which isn't excess. But I just thought that I was not going to be disruptive and not going to allow them to say, you can't interfere with our decision making or something like that. So the important thing was just to know somebody was there listening to what they were saying, and often I was the only person there. Now, there was another trick here. I told you it used to drain, water in this area used to drain to the north, and indeed it did. But there was a point in time when the ice had built up to the point where it blocked north-flowing rivers. And in particular, the Chemung, the Cohocton and Canisteo, and whatever the other third one is. Tioga, thank you, pardon me. Shame. That water couldn't go north because the ice was in the way. And so water accumulated up to the hilltops and spilled over near Big Flats, literally spilled over the hilltops and was pushed south. What a trick, and what a change, because it meant that we were no longer connected to the Great Lakes. We were connected to the Chesapeake Bay because the river was pushed out of its channel and over the hill and cut down. You know, it's a narrow valley there that goes into Elmira. That tricked the water system to connecting us to Baltimore and Washington and Chesapeake Bay. We are not technically part of the Finger Lakes anymore because our drainage divide, is between here and Hammondsport. And the river scoops around to Corning and then cut down through the hill to Elmira and then some to the south. Now, quickly, if you believe all that, I want to remind you that the bedrock that was cut is very dense. It's either listed as a sandy limestone or a limey sandstone, and it does not have a capacity to hold much water. That's why when you drive around here this time of year, you see these frozen waterfalls all over the road cuts. That's not because there's a tremendous amount of water in those rocks. It's because it just can't hold the water. It's too dense. There's no capacity there for the water to be held, so it spills out on many of the bedding plains and flows out as waterfalls and frozen. Okay, but what does hold the water is the glacial deposits that are in those pre-glacial valleys. That network of valleys is filled with a mixture of stuff that is of a nature that it can hold a whole lot of water. There are capacities in there that give room for water to be held. So it's the valley fill is like a sponge, and that is the aquifer. It's this old network of valleys, a narrow valley system that allows water to flow through it. We have very little water to speak of in the bedrock itself, but this glacial material that fills the valleys is our Chemung aquifer. And if you have that in your head, then you can understand why we are limited in the amount of water that we can use and dispose of. It's not that a broad aquifer like the Ogallala out in the west or something like that. It's just this narrow system of rivers that pre-existed here, that the valleys filled with the glacial deposits. That's our aquifer.
So we're here tonight to talk about the Painted Post case. Gene Wazinski, who's one of the petitioners in the case, just gave us a really excellent background on what our aquifers are like. And I think that's really the most significant point of our case is for people to understand the aquifers. So, and we still have a lot of work to do on that, as I will talk tonight. But I want to say that there were many people that worked on this case and made it happen. But Gene Wazinski was the essential person, because she did go to the Painted Post meetings, she saw what they were doing, and she wrote a letter to the paper, to the leader, explaining to everyone, this was in March, I think February or March of 2012, what the significance was of their water sale. And a lot of people started writing letters in support of the points that Gene made, and the Bath Peace and Justice Group sponsored a program in March of 2012 where Gene was a speaker. I spoke about some of the legal issues, and Virginia Rasmussen spoke. And out of that presentation, we sort of built a lot of interest with a lot of people to bring the lawsuit. Gene was the first petitioner in our lawsuit. One of the other early petitioners was Mike Finneran. He and his mother were both petitioners, and their family lived in Painted Post for a long time, and his sisters, Mary and Ann, were also very supportive of the lawsuit. As I said, many people did a lot. Beth Miller organized a wonderful rally in September 2012, got a lot of excellent speakers, gave an excellent speech herself about the aquifer and what the significance of these water sales is. So Now, you probably have heard we brought suit in Steuben County Supreme Court in June 2012 to challenge the village on their determination that this water was exempt from any sort of environmental review. And the case took a long time, but 3.5 years later, we got a ruling from the appellate division in Rochester that upheld our position and said that the village was improperly claimed an exemption and they had to do an environmental review. So let me see if I can. It did. So, so where are we now? Sort of now that we've got a favorable decision, can we all go home happy? And the answer is not yet. These are two of our petitioners, Michael and John Marvin. And if you followed this in the paper, you know that John Marvin was a really key petitioner because he lived very close to the water loading facility, and because he lived so close, the courts found that all the petitioners had standing. If we had not had John Marvin as a petitioner, we probably would have gotten thrown out of court. So we're very grateful to John for joining us. So where are John and Mike? And they are at the water loading facility in Painted Post. And to give oops, I'm going backwards. And to give a little bit more the sense of where that is, here's the village of Painted Post here. They are standing, not right there, but they're standing right about here. And this is the old Dresser Rand, Ingersoll Rand foundry site that the village wanted to convert to a rail loading station. Here is, I'm getting my buttons mixed up. Here is the Cohocton River flowing east. This is the Tioga River flowing north from Pennsylvania, and they join in Painted Post here to form the Chemung River and go and flow down into the Susquehanna. Now, in addition to the rivers themselves, the area surrounding the river actually, this whole area is the aquifer, as Jean described. The whole river, the whole valley here is an aquifer. It's not just right under the river. So Painted Post has its municipal water system with various wells around drawing water, and all these wells are taking groundwater from the aquifer. And this diagram shows the extent of the aquifer. As Jean said, it's narrow, but it's still much wider than the river. The river here is the white. This is the Tioga River. The Cohocton is smaller, so it's really just shown as a black line. The Chemung is larger. So this gives you a sense of the ratio of the rivers themselves to the size of the aquifer. So Painted Post is right here at this junction. Now, I mentioned some of the facts about our case. It really started, the issue came to a head in February of 2012, and that's when the village decided that they would go forward with their plans to sell water and to lease village land for the water loading facility. And we decided to challenge that with an Article 78 proceeding and filed a petition in Steuben County Supreme Court. We only have 4 months to bring a secret challenge, so we filed on the very last day possible because we didn't have a lot of time to prepare. A year later, we got a decision in our favor from the trial court, Then the appellate division ruled against us on standing. They said even John Marvin wasn't close enough, but the Court of Appeals agreed to take the case, and they said John Marvin is close enough. And they sent the case back to the Fourth Department, and the Fourth Department, with standing, decided in our favor. The Fourth Department ruled in our favor on all the other issues in the case, and they said they were not entitled to an exemption from SEQA. They have to do a SEQA review. They annulled the bulk water sale agreement. They annulled the lease of the land, and they put in an injunction against any more water sales. So that was on New Year's Eve. So where are we now? What's next? So the village really has a couple of choices. They can appeal this decision of the Fourth Department up to the Court of Appeals again. It's my personal view that the court is not likely to take the case, but they can do that. And then their other option, if they want to go forward, is to now redo the bulk water sale and redo the lease and do a proper environmental review. So what is involved in a proper environmental review? And this is the whole process. I have another slide that's a little closer, so don't try to read this, but we'll go to the next slide, which shows the beginning of the process. So the very first decision, and I want to say just a little bit about SEQRA, which is the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act. This was enacted in 1975, and it requires every state and local governmental agency in New York to consider environmental impacts when they're making a decision either to approve an action, such as grant a permit, or to undertake an action, such as, in this case, the village leasing its land. SEQRA requires that an agency identify and mitigate the significant environmental impacts of an activity that it's proposing or permitting, and at the end of the process, the agency has to certify that the action it proposes is one that avoids or minimizes adverse environmental impacts to the maximum extent practicable. So that's the process that the village did some parts of that for the lease agreement, but they didn't do any of it for the bulk water sale. The court said you have to do both, and you have to do them together. You cannot segment your review. So when we start, their first decision is the action subject to SEQRA. And that has been they decided that the lease was subject to SEQRA the first time they looked at it, but they decided they were exempt for the bulk water sale. The court has said you're not exempt. So now, and that's a type 2 action, is an exempt action. So they're not type 2, we know that. So now they have a choice of being type 1, do a full environmental assessment, fill out a full environmental assessment form, or choosing to be, if they think it's an unlisted action, which gets a little bit less scrutiny, then they can do a short form. Now, the form itself, you probably have seen your local town boards, city boards, village boards do environmental reviews, and sometimes they fill out the forms and they're relatively cursory about what the exact nature of the review that they give. And I think this is where our challenge is now with the Village of Painted Post. I assume that they do want to go forward with this water sale. They do make money, but I think we have to show them why the significance of this decision, and we have to urge them to look into the impacts, to understand more about the aquifer, to study what's going on, and what they're proposing. So this is going to take more than just a couple of people at the meetings. I mean, we have to make, it's not just the village board, but we have to have everyone in the community be concerned about this. And it isn't even just the people who are taking water from the aquifer, because the whole region, I think as Jean explained, the water is actually flowing from the hillsides, but this aquifer is serving as sort of a backup water source for our whole region. So this has an impact on all of us, and that's, we want the village to understand that. And when they fill out the form, which they will then fill out either of these forms, to really take into account what they're doing and to have studies that back it up. So if several agencies are involved, because many actions have multiple agencies, then you have to select a lead agency. Some people have suggested that it might be helpful in this case to try to get the DEC to be the lead agency. So that's something we might want to consider. Do we want ask the DEC if they want to get involved? And so then once they look at the impacts, fill out this form, look at these questions, they have two choices. They can say, yes, this is going to have an effect on the environment, and if they do that, then they have to go through a whole environmental impact statement process, and you've probably seen that, where they prepare all these studies and everything. That's what we want them to do, but they can look at what they prepared. I don't see why they would, but they might want to say a negative declaration. There is not going to be any impact from this. So we have to explain, as I was saying, why there's an impact. And then, if they determine that there's an impact, then we go through this whole environmental review process with public comment, final EIS, and do the review process, and then that can be judicially reviewed. Now, it is the standard that the courts apply when they review these decisions. I think the people in PHE, Frank Patterson's here, they experienced this when they challenged the facility that was right over the Horseheads Aquifer, that the court was very respectful, shall we say, of the village's determination that there was no environmental impact there. They did a negative declaration for that, Frank? The village of Horseheads did a negative declaration for the Horseheads, and you challenged that in court, but you lost. So, that's just an example of what, it can be hard to win those cases. So we want to lay the groundwork here to really get people educated before they get started on this, if we can. So that's the SEQRA process. So now, that's a brief overview of the SEQRA process. So now they have another approval that they need to have, which is from the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. You may recall the initial coverage, they said they had that approval, and one of their arguments in our lawsuit was that preempted their need to do a SEQRA review. The court found it does not. That's because it's very clear that the Susquehanna River Basin Commission approval is in addition to any state or local approvals, and also that the SRBC approval is based on an existing approval from the village, and they actually did it backwards. They claimed that they had an approval before they actually had it. So now that the court has invalidated the bulk water sale, said the village can't do that yet, it's not surprising that Schweppe here, which is the purchaser of the water, which is the one who has to apply for the SRBC approval, the Village of Painted Post has been removed from the list of their approved water suppliers. And I don't think will be added back until they actually go through the SEQRA process. So now I want to encourage people. We talked about helping the village learn, get aware of these issues. The next village board meeting is this coming Monday, February the 8th, 7 p.m. And I do encourage people to attend that. even if you're not from Painted Post, I think, as I said, it's significant for all of us what they, how they go forward with this. We don't know whether they're planning to do it now or not, but hopefully they will give us some indication at this meeting. So what impacts should be looked at under SECRA? I just wanted to go over a few of these, particularly there are a lot of possible environmental impacts from these proposed projects. The impacts on the Painted Post municipal water system, their own water system, impacts on the whole aquifer, on groundwater quality, on the environment, on other organisms that depend on the surface water, the movement of contaminants, impacts on other water users in this whole region, their impacts from operation of the loading facility, which is noise. That was one of the issues in the case. Impacts from operation of the trains, and impacts in Pennsylvania where the water is being transported and used. And under SECRA, all of these are the types of impacts that need to be looked at. So I'm going to focus on the aquifer issues. This map shows what Jean described to us. This is the Chemung River watershed. And it has a number, you can see that a number of rivers are coming together to form the Chemung River. The Tioga River here, this is the Kawaneski River just below the New York, Pennsylvania line. This is the Canisteo River. This is Tuscarora Creek running into the Canisteo. Here's the Cohocton. And they all come together at Painted Post. So Painted Post is actually receiving the water from this entire region is coming to Painted Post. So my perspective for Painted Post to say, oh, we've got a lot of water, we're going to sell that water and make money for our village. Well, it's the water from this whole region. It's not their water. and all sorts of issues about water rights. So it's just, it's helpful to understand, like Jean described it to us, the lay of the land here, and you can see all these, this is very hilly, and there are lots of hilltops, and these are the streams and the rivers running down the valleys. Now, the significance of this location has been recognized for a long time. You probably know the name Painted Post refers to an Indian post that was present at this location. This is a statue recreating that's in the village now. And the early map, I think this is 1792, of this whole region, you'll see that Painted Post is one of the very few locations marked on this map. Now, I think Williamsburg is actually Bath, is that true? But anyway, or Bath is here, maybe Bath is here. But anyway, Painted Post was a very early, was recognized very early, and you see it here at this critical location where all the rivers are coming together. So one question is, how much water are we talking about? And I think it helps to see it in terms of the rail cars that they use to transport the water. So one of the things in the situation that we have is that they actually, after we filed our lawsuit in June, we asked for a preliminary injunction, but that didn't happen. And so they went ahead and they constructed the rail loading facility, and they actually started to sell water in August of 2012. So we started to see how things were going to work. And these are rail cars that were carrying the water. Each of these cars holds over 23,000 gallons of water. The rail loading facility that they built on the old foundry site holds 42 cars. So there's it can load 42 cars at once. There's a little spigot sort of by each car, and the total amount of water that can be held by those 42 cars is almost 1 million gallons of water. And I'll just point out to you that John Marvin's house is right here, so he is that close to the loading facility. So going back to this aquifer map, because this map of the Corning Aquifer, done by USGS, shows the estimated yield of water to wells in the area. And you can see that the greatest amount, sections that are the darkest are those that have the greatest yield of water. And greater than 1,000 gallons a minute is this dark area, and Painted Post is right here in that area. So again, this is another indication of, the water is coming from all over, and Painted Post is right in the area where the water is the deepest in the aquifer. Now here is another illustration from USGS showing how a valley fill, diagramming a valley fill aquifer. So Jean described the type of aquifers that we have in our area called valley fill aquifers. And then we have the bedrock hills with some till on the top. The water basically flows down those hills into the valley and into the gravel deposits below that. So this is an illustration of the aquifer and how all the water that's flowing on the hillsides flows down into the aquifer and into the river. Now, we are having, thanks to the League of Women Voters, and where's Karen? Karen Bizanz is organizing this for the League of Women Voters. We're having a presentation by Todd Miller, who is a retired USGS hydrologist, who is the main author for 10 of the USGS reports on aquifers in this region, including the Corning Aquifer and the Elmira Aquifer. And he's agreed to come and speak to us on February 27th. Saturday, it's going to be Saturday morning at 10 a.m. in the Corning Library. And he's going to explain to us in detail how aquifers work, how the valley fill aquifer works, and what more hydrogeologic data is needed to really understand what's going on with the Painted Post aquifer and whether the withdrawals that they have talked about in the past, whether those are really safe and sustainable withdrawals that the aquifer can withstand, especially if they're being exported. And he will also discuss methods that can be used to track contaminants in the aquifer and how large pumping in one location can affect the movement of contaminants. So I'm just going to touch on a few points about the aquifer, some of which are somewhat legal points. Now there have been 2 studies in the past of how groundwater flow works in the aquifer. There was a report by the Susquehanna River Basin Commission in 1988, groundwater flow model of the Corning area, and subsequently, in 2002, the municipalities in the aquifer got together and they commissioned a study of water resources in the Corning Valley. The goal of this study was to come to some sort of watershed agreement as to how the different municipalities would work together in times of drought, in particular, to allocate water resources, but they never got together. And so this is a helpful study, but it has not come to fruition. There are a couple of points that are made in these studies that I think are worth emphasizing. The Stearns report, that's this report, states that groundwater supplies in the Corning Aquifer are fed primarily from river recharge, although some of the yield is contributed by upland precipitation and stream flow. And I do have a diagram here. Oh, well, before I get to the diagram, I did want to, this is a map from the 2002 study that shows all the wells in the aquifer. Well, not all the wells, I shouldn't say all the wells. Some of the major wells. So it shows, you know, we're not just talking about Painted Post taking water, we're talking about all of these. We have municipal users, we have industrial users. The municipal wells are in blue, the active industrial wells are in black, and the storage tanks are in orange. So Painted Post has a big storage tank up on the hill, West Hill, near where Michael lives, I think it's, and there are other storage tanks around here on the hillsides, which the water's pumped up to the storage tanks and flows down. So these, you know, if you're going to say how much of what effect a large water withdrawal has from Painted Post, and it's taking it from a well right about here, then we have to look at the impacts on all of these wells. And this is just a close-up that shows the wells closest to Painted Post. These wells are just, so this is a diagram that shows aquifer recharge depending on the water level. Jean can probably explain this a little bit better than I can. But I'm going to just give you a few quotes from this, from these reports, and then I'll ask Jean if she wants to comment on this. But so, as I said, by river recharge. So,
Just water going down into the aquifer from the river.
From the river.
Yeah. And these arrows are going the wrong way.
So, they're two different, it's supposed to show two different conditions.
Yeah.
So this is showing the condition where the aquifer is being recharged from the river. Now, the 1988 SRBC report states that production wells of Corning Glass and Ingersoll Rand, located in Gang Mills and Painted Post, induce an estimated 90% of their discharge from adjacent reaches of the Cohocton River under average steady-state conditions. About 70% of total well discharges in Corning is diverted into the aquifer from river reaches in the vicinity of the pumping wells. And then SRBC report says, associated with the high yield of superficial outwash aquifers is an inherent vulnerability to pollution from surface sources. The study notes that the quality of recharge must be protected to prevent degradation of groundwater quality. So you want to comment on that, Jean? Just for a second.
Any diagram like this is not going to fit all situations, but I think the important thing here to realize is that in our situation, let's use this one, the river itself is only a small thing going through this. This is our aquifer. This area is all bedrock of this limey sandstone or sandy limestone that does not yield water. Well, yes, it has some in it. I don't mean to say there's none. And you see it dripping out on the road cuts in the form of frozen waterfalls. But our river itself is suspended up here. And this is our aquifer right here. Wouldn't it be nice if all of this was the aquifer? But that ain't what we got, folks. We've only got this little bit here. And the water flowing on it. Now, from time to time, during flood time, the bottom of the river is scoured sufficiently that there is water that leaves the river itself and does go down into the glacial gravel. But by and large, there isn't a whole lot of exchange between the river itself and the gravel below until you punch a hole.
I see some of the diagrams show the unconfined aquifer and the confined aquifer.
Yes.
Yeah, so the unconfined is actually connected to the river more closely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that situation occurs frequently during high flow when it's scoured free. Listen, Rachel didn't know about this. She asked me to write another letter to the editor. And I didn't do one with content, but you'll see what I did do. I was going to give you a copy of this. I wrote this to the leader on January 29. Let's see if it gets into the paper in time. I said, Yogi was right. It ain't over till it's over. Yes, New York State courts have told the village of Painted Post that it cannot sell Chemung aquifer water to Pennsylvania gas frackers. Why? Because they did not precede their decision with a proper environmental study of the results of that withdrawal. What is the effect on communities downstream? What impacts the village during transport? What are the limits of supply, both geologically and climatically? Only rainfall and snowmelt can maintain and replenish the aquifer. On these we depend. Let's see how seriously the village considers these conditions and have a look at small democracy. Enjoy an evening of watching how it works. And while you're at it, be on guard that we don't, I can't read my own writing, and be on guard that we don't lose our water resources like the city of Flint, Michigan, where an inattentive citizenry lost theirs. The next inning starts at the Painted Post Village Hall, Monday, February 8 at 7 p.m. See you there. Thanks for the reminder, Yogi.
That's a great letter, Jean. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I just want to speak a little bit about contaminants in the aquifer, which is another issue that's addressed in these reports. And it's an issue that's very present at this site in Painted Post. This was where they built the water loading facility is the site of the old Ingersoll Rand foundry. And there are a lot of contaminants on the site. There was a brownfield cleanup of the site in the 1990s. And then Ingersoll Rand generously sold this site to the village.
Passing on their problem.
Yes, and the deed under which the village took title to the site states that polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons are located in soils at and below the ground surface of the site, and that such PAHs may pose a risk to humans in a scenario where future use of the site includes invasive activities at or below the surface of the site. The deed contains a restriction providing that the grantee, and that's the village and its subsidiary, that is the actual purchaser, shall prohibit the use of groundwater underlying the premises unless the grantee or its successor first obtains permission to do so from DEC. So the DEC did give some oversight of the construction of the rail loading facility, which supposedly did not disturb the surface of the site. There are old groundwater wells that were actually in the site, and so the village is not taking water from those wells, but it is taking water from a well that's just a block and a half away. And so one question is, well, what groundwater is underlying the premises? We have the whole Corning Aquifer underlying the premises. That is a question, and it's one of the things that we said in the lawsuit. They need to do modeling and pumping tests to see if it's possible that heavy pumping from this well, and I'm going to show you now. That's the well there, but this is the foundry site from the study that the final sort of study that put the brownfield remediation, the conclusion of that. I'll just point here, this is Painted Post Municipal Well number 4, it's right there. That's the well that is being used to supply the loading facility, which is now located right here. So this is the old foundry site. There were lots of monitoring wells on the site. Apparently those monitoring wells have not been kept in place. I really don't know, but they did lots of monitoring there, and they did discover these PAHs.
The thing that is that creates the vulnerability is that when you pump from a well, you create a cone, a depressed cone, and water flows towards that from other areas. And so this may be pulling contaminated water towards the municipal well up there, which I don't know that that's a permanently municipal well, but it's the one they're using.
Well, it is. Yeah, I mean, it is one of their permanent wells.
Yeah,
it's one of the ones that they're using.
It's called the drawdown,
yeah.
And the water literally flows towards that well, and it'll pull in from anything around it.
So this is the most significant issue, really, regarding understanding how the pumping of this well is going to affect the aquifer. Is it going to draw these contaminants into the Painted Post water system? Is it going to draw the contaminants somehow, cause some flows, different flows that would draw it into other wells, other water systems? So that's something that cries out for more study. This is the well. It's in a little triangle. Looks all very nice. Here is that triangle here. Then on this area of the loading facility, it's right in there. So that's where the well is, right next to the loading facility. Now, there are just a couple of more points I want to make about the aquifer. The Corning Aquifer is one of 18 primary aquifers in New York. A primary aquifer is a primary source of drinking water for the local region. And you can see on this map that the magenta aquifers are the primary aquifers, and they're not many in New York, but many of them are here on the Cohocton and the Chemung. And then also on the Susquehanna, which is running down, these are all running down to Waverly and Sayre here, where the Chemung joins the Susquehanna, the upper Susquehanna, and then flows south. So we have the upper Cohocton, the lower Cohocton, the Corning Aquifer, the Elmira Aquifer, and the Waverly Aquifer. 5 aquifers right here on this stretch are all primary aquifers, and DEC and Department of Health, they all say that primary aquifers are entitled to all sorts of protection because they are a primary drinking water source. When the village did their environmental review of their lease, they filled out the EAF form and they said they were not located over a primary aquifer. So this is just a close-up that shows these, the 5 aquifers here in the Chemung Valley, the Chemung watershed. Now the other point that I want to make is that the SRPC has declared the Chemung aquifer, the Corning aquifer right here as a potentially stressed area. There are only 8 potentially stressed areas in the whole Susquehanna River Basin that have been identified by the SRBC staff. And the only one in New York and the only one in the whole upper part of the Susquehanna River Basin is the Corning aquifer. Now, the SRBC staff defines these potentially stressed areas as areas where the utilization of groundwater resources is potentially approaching or has exceeded the sustainable limit of the resources. So again, this determination would seem to call out for some sort of review of this water, of large water withdrawals in the Corning aquifer. Now, in terms of impacts from the use of the water, SECRO requires that all impacts be looked at. And in this case, the water's being used in Pennsylvania. It's being used for hydrofracking. So I'm just going to go very quickly through these slides because I think we, everyone in this room knows a lot about hydrofracking and the risks and dangers of hydrofracking. But I just wanted to show you the map of the rail line that takes the water down to Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. It's actually Wellsboro Junction. This is the Wellsboro and Corning Railroad, and Painted Post loading facilities right here, and then it goes down there. The Tioga River is flowing down this way, so it goes slightly over there. This is the loading facility in Wellsboro Junction. These are the tanks where the water is being offloaded from the rail cars, and then it's being shipped by truck to the various fracking sites in the area. This is the SRBC map of our region. It shows different types of permits. It shows, and the gold permits are gas pad permits. So you can see that just over the border from us here in Tioga County, Pennsylvania, there are a lot of gas wells being drilled, or have been drilled. And here's Wellsboro right in here, sort of in the thick of things. So that's where this water is being taken. Again, these are just some statistics about how much water is used for each frac job and how that compares to other uses. And as Jean said earlier, this fracking is a consumptive use. The water is put into the ground. Most of the water never comes back. The water that does come back is polluted from the chemicals that are in the ground and also from what they put down. This is a USGS map that shows hydraulic fracture water use per well, and you can see that right here in our area is where some of the very highest water use is being used. And this is a map by it's a diagram by Sky Truth. It's an imaginary diagram. How the fracking industry says, well, these chemicals that they're putting in are just a tiny percentage of the water, so you don't really have to worry about them. But they are showing here that even though they are a tiny percentage of the water, given how many millions of gallons of water are being used, these are the barrels of chemicals that are going into that water. And so this is some of these are very toxic substances. The red are unknown substances. They haven't disclosed the material safety data sheet for those substances. So just to briefly review next steps, we'll go through the SEQRA review. That's the next step for the village at some point. When will the village do that? We know that their gas prices are on a low. Is Schweppe, which is a subsidiary of Shell, that's actually been paying for this whole lawsuit. They agreed in the water sale agreement that any legal challenge they would pay for, and they have paid for the village's legal fees, but the village has also been represented by their lawyer, so they have controlled the village's legal defense as well. But this, again from SkyTruth, shows that in December the 8th, 3 wells were issued, 3 gas drilling permits were issued in Tioga County in Richmond Township to Schweppe. So Schweppe got 3 permits in December, and Richmond Township is the township just south of us. Lawrenceville is at the top, and here's Wellsboro there. So these are permits that were issued right in the Wellsboro area. So again, I want to urge you to join us at the village board meeting, to come to our program on February 27th and learn more about the aquifer. And also at that program, we'll have members of the Painted Post Water Sentinels are going to have their water meters there, and we're encouraging people to bring water samples. You can bring it from your own tap or whatever samples you want to bring, and we'll test it for total dissolved solids and conductivity. So that is my presentation, and I think Jean, that was a wonderful letter. That's our recommended action. So thank you. Hi, Meryl.
Why doesn't Pennsylvania drill more wells, water wells down there?
Well, they don't have that much water either. They have the same situation that we have. And there were articles maybe 2 years ago about how in Richmond Township they were having a real water shortage, and many businesses couldn't keep operating and new businesses couldn't start because they didn't have enough water. So they don't have that much water themselves.
So that is sort of a warning to New York?
A warning to New York? You could certainly say that, yes. Peter.
As I was listening to you talk about negative comments,
Negative declaration.
negative declaration, and my observation, towns kind of go through all this stuff. What kind of skills or what kind of credentials do people have to have in order to fill out the secret? I mean, it sounds like the people who don't have the engineering credentials that you people and research that you people have done, other people have done, to answer that question. So one of the things that comes to my mind is they don't have the credentials to do it. They're doing it because they have other economic reasons. Are they breaking the law?
Well, I will say that the Village of Painted Post did commission an engineering report on the water loading facility. And so they did have from Hunt Engineers, so they were referring, they did refer to that in their EF form that's now been validated. So they did have some report. As we said earlier, the standards that are applied by the courts in reviewing a negative determination is great difference. But so to say that they weren't qualified to make the decision if they actually looked at if they looked at the issues, I don't know of a precedent for that. I mean, certainly would be, it would be, you can make that argument that they didn't take a hard look. That's the standard. Did they take a hard look? And does a hard look mean an informed look? And what's required? What types of studies are required for an agency to make a determination? Yeah, I mean,
because they're an engineering firm and everything else, they're probably, what you're implying is, saying is that they're not responsible for a commitment that might be.
well, I think that, they're given the benefit of the doubt. So if they make, if they make a sincere effort to look at the issues. But I think this is where, the entire community has a responsibility for them to understand what, to understand what the issues are and to inform them. I mean, their need to inform themselves is partly our responsibility as well. Do you want to say anything about
I would agree
yeah.
with what you're saying.
So, we have to make sure that they're informed also. George. So the Corning Aquifer is upriver of the Chemung Aquifer in the Elmira Aquifer, and other municipalities have expressed interest in selling their water, and not only that, we know that the town of Irwin in the Corning Aquifer is selling its water. So they decided to do that in 2010, and nobody really knew about it. Under SECRA, you have 4 months to challenge. So they were not challenged under SECRA. There might be other legal theories that you could challenge those withdrawals if someone's being harmed. Most of the other theories you have to show harm. Corning and Cornell, all of these municipalities expressed interest in making money. They see this, painted post. I think the village board was taken aback by the challenges because they thought they were doing a good thing, finding a source of money.
In some sense, my being there at that meeting is not just outside.
Right, exactly, and I agree with you. Right, and I think that we could all say something. I mean, that they're making a decision that doesn't just affect them. It's like the town of Reading on Seneca Lake. They want to put a gas storage facility in their town that's going to affect the whole lake, the whole region. It isn't just their decision. Exactly, I agree with you. Michael?
Well, town meeting that I attended when they made area.
Would you come and say a few words, Michael? Because I did want to invite Michael to say a few words about being a petitioner. Yeah, good.
But the main thing to get through to people and through to the village council is that it's not just a village issue. It affects the whole area. Everything's connected. And they don't understand that. They look at the village needs money, so it's a good source of money. And I don't think it got through to them fully because there were people there speaking, trying to explain it to them, and they would kind of shut people down. At least at the meeting that I attended before they made a decision. So it's difficult in these times to have people understand the nature of how everything's connected. And it's when I talk to hunters, when I talk to fishermen, I say, do you like hunting, do you like fishing? Well, look at your water supply, look at the fish, look at the wildlife, how it affects the wildlife, how it affects the fish, and how this whole thing is not just a little area, it's not just our land we're protecting, our little piece of land, because it's not our land to begin with. So that's difficult to get through to people when they look at, well, I'm making money on this, and I need money to support my family. That's totally understandable. But to also understand that that's limited, and so is this. Water's limited. People say, well, it rains, we have water, we're fine. It's not like the forest that you see the trees bearing. They don't see that. So what got me is that it was a Foundry site that they used, and I didn't feel that they really were looking at the full impact. You know, we cleaned the ground, you know, we cleaned the surface, but we weren't looking at what's underneath the surface and what's underneath that, what's underneath that, and how all that will trickle down and affect everything. So, yeah, so that's the hard part I get when I talk to people about this. We're all united here, you know, kind of, you know, one voice here. But when you start to talk to people who aren't necessarily of our voice, it's hard to get across sometimes what we're doing.
He's absolutely right. It must be that you attended the one meeting I didn't make, which was the night they actually made the decision to sell. They had talked about it for months and months, but I missed that one meeting. I never heard the word environment mentioned. All I did was talk about money and talk about what correspondence had come back and forth. And then, yes, are those the lawyers from Schweppe? Yes, they are. And I was supposed to be duly impressed, I think. But the decision was, up to my understanding of it, was not based on anything, but we need money to lower the taxes. And
That's understandable. I mean, that's totally understandable. We're all in that situation, you know. But
Was your mother at that meeting too?
what's my life?
Your mother at?
No, she wasn't. She passed away.
She was an active supporter.
She was an active supporter.
Behind the
Yes, at that
scenes.
time, she was an active supporter, but she didn't mean to be.
Here.
That's just it, so.
Here, Michael, use the mic. Here, calling for you to use the mic.
Okay. Money's the big illusion. And it's the big draw that we all feel in these times, you know. And I think the important part is, what are we leaving behind? What are we leaving for our children? What are we leaving for their children? When water's gone, it's gone. It's not like, you know, we can save seeds and replant trees. We can't replant water. And everything circulates. So that's the message I think people, the general public, needs to understand. And do it not with a, you're evil, we're good, or we're evil, they're good, but with, we're human beings, we all live on this planet. You know, let's understand it. And I think the climate change arguments, I think there's a slow movement that people are starting to understand how everything impacts everything, but it's slow. And I think we just have to just keep having intelligent, informed discussions with everyone, even if they're not on our side. I think something gets in there and they wiggle in there and they have them think about it a little bit harder. So, that's all.
Yep.
What is the purpose of the February meeting?
This is just, okay, thank you for coming. This is the next village board meeting, and we hope that they will discuss what, how they react to the decision, and that we, one thing we want to learn is what sort of time frame. Pardon? I'm talking about February the 8th, next Monday, is the next village board meeting. And we want to know, what are they planning? I guess, are they planning to move forward quickly? Are they, or not? That's sort of, Frank? It is, we don't know the agenda, so the Village of Painted Post does not have a website. They, I guess if somebody went to the village board, village hall, they might be able to get a copy of the agenda. Maybe we can get Michael to do that for us. So that's, we're trying to learn, and we hope, that they might, even if it's not on the agenda, we hope they may answer some questions just about what they're planning. And to offer to them, we also want to offer to them some, analysis. I guess. Well, they did an EAF for the lease of the loading facility land. So that's one thing. And maybe how did Frank? Maybe you want to come up and talk a little bit about how you approached this in Horsehead. So when did you start in the process, and what did you do? That would be helpful for us to understand.
My name is Frank Patterson. Well, the years have just multiplied. In June of 2009, we got wind of the fact that Schlumberger wanted to build an oil field services facility at the holding point, which is about 900 acres in the village of Horseheads. Now, during World War II, this was a warehousing operation and a prisoner war camp, and the government finished the war and just sat there. The village classified it as an industrial zone, therefore they could do what they wanted to with it. An outfit came in and bought those warehouses and was doing warehousing there. There's a lot of open area. So they worked out with Schlumberger to build this oil field services facility. Now, this holding point is about 2 to 3 feet above the aquifer. Imagine that. And it's fed by the Catherine Creek, which runs from north down to the holding point, south to the holding point, and turns around and runs north back into the Seneca Lake. Newtown Creek, which starts up in upper part of Chemung County, again runs south through the holding point, big aquifer, and runs down to the Chemung River. Back in the olden days, they had the Chemung Canal, which went from Elmira to Seneca Lake. And the holding point, the Horseheads area is the highest point. There's a moraine that goes through there, and that's the low point of the moraine. And they had dug a canal from East Corning, called a feeder canal, in Taurus, and that kept the canal full of water, so the water could run into Seneca Lake, and also into the Chemung River to float the boats. Now, this holding point is quite large, and there's a wetland there. So the dry part is only 2 or 3 feet above the wetland. The DEC keeps good eye on that wetland. There's a concrete plant there that dumps stuff into the wetland, so the DEC watches those guys pretty closely. Now, our concern was, what are you putting in this holding? What are you going to put in this place? Well, you got a bunch of chemicals going to store there. What are they? They're proprietary. They're not going to tell you. Interesting. And you're going to build holding ponds. For what reason? Well, we're going to take our trucks up to the gas wells. We're going to dump cement, dump chemicals into these gas wells, frack them, plug them up with cement, and bring the trucks back and wash them off. Let the water go into these holding ponds. Well, it's great. How deep are the ponds? Well, they're so deep, but we're going to line them with clay. So you have a 6-inch clay liner with who knows what kind of contaminated water sitting in them. Now, this started in June of 2009. By November, they had gone through the process of the EAF, and they declared a negative declaration, which means no further action required. We said, wait a minute, we got a problem with this. Just a bunch of people. I have no idea what we're doing, okay? Helen Slotchie appeared on the scene. We got our arms around her. She's an attorney from Ithaca. And she helped us through the formation of a company called, we call ourselves People for Healthy Environment Incorporated. We're a non-for-profit company, so we're held harmless in case Schlumberger wants to sue us. Okay, that's the only reason we did that. We have bylaws, and we pay taxes. We're not a for-profit taxable corporation. So he went to court with Article 78. Schlumberger and the village showed up about 5,000 documents, most of them blank. A lot of them were signed after the negative declaration. And the judge, the court, ruled that there wasn't enough information there to go against Schlumberger. We did not prevail. Now, the EAF...
Sequence of events right. They held a hearing in the Watkins Glen High School, and there were 800 or 900 people at that hearing. And that's when things started to slow down, and they decided to do an environmental review. And so, and then, you know, there was the environmental review, it was prepared. Again, we were starting to hear, you know, well, you know, this is probably going to go through, you know, even when they do an environmental review, like we just saw in Chemung County with the Chemung County landfill expansion, even when they do an environmental review, it often goes through. So then, you know, there was the pressure, you know, a lot of pressure was building. I think that the different Seneca Lake organizations have done a wonderful job in making people aware of what the issues are with Seneca Lake. And it's taken a lot of work, a lot of people, but they've really done a marvelous job of educating people about the issues that are presented there. And, you know, and then the next step was getting an issues conference, and I heard that the issues, you know, the wine industry went to visit Governor Cuomo's office, and it was shortly after their visit to Cuomo's office that the issues conference was announced. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure, you know, public awareness, public involvement from all types of the public have to be involved to get things to happen. I mean, I think that's what happened with fracking, was having so many people raising good arguments. But I mean, you raised good arguments about the holding point. But, you know, and one of the things, you know, working with PHE and the other groups, and also being somewhat involved in Seneca Lake, I think, you know, we really need a sort of similar movement for the Chemung watershed, and even maybe a focus organization. Beth, you asked me some time ago about a water keeper type organization. People may have heard that Gas Free Seneca has now formed a Seneca Lake water keeper. So, you know, some organization that would be for this whole the Chemung Basin, and build concern about the different things that are happening here. One of the things I've been learning about recently is the gas storage facility in Savona. So we've raised a lot of issues about what the storage facility in Seneca Lake. There are a lot of issues about the Savona storage facility. So there are a number of issues that we have here in our watershed. Frank?
In my opinion, it's very important that you attend these meetings. Better yet, if it's on the agenda. Probably it's not on the agenda. If they give you the opportunity to speak before under the public meetings law, they should be able to do that. You should have that right. You have to identify yourself and where you live. It's not important where you live, but you have to identify yourself. If you don't attend these meetings, if you don't write comments to these people, you've lost your right to challenge them later right down the road. You have to have some kind of a paper trail that says, hey, we tried to get you guys to do your job. You got to demonstrate that. Whether one person, 20 people, 50 people, or 1 letter, 2 letters, whatever, you got to demonstrate that. The Chemung County landfill, I mean, it's a different thing. They started off with doing the EIS, which is great, okay? I'm not sure the results was great, but they started off with that. And we are challenging that. It's a long process. We're going to get down to soon as the DEC sooner or later, but we're getting there. So it's a slow process. It's important to pay attention, to go, to speak, to write your comments.
And just to point out, in terms of the EIS that they just did for the Chemung County landfill, that didn't come out of a vacuum either, because when they did the previous expansion in 2007, the local group Residents for the Preservation of Wildman and Chemung, and PHE, participated in an administrative proceeding to challenge that, and that was a long, involved, and expensive process working on that. So they knew the community was concerned, and I think that led them probably then this time to do the EIS, which they might not have done if that previous proceeding hadn't taken place. Yeah, so getting involved, it may be just you're laying the foundation for years to come, but it's important.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Yes.
I have two questions, and the first question would be, can you share with us what you think Shell might be or might have paid to fight this case that the little people brought against them?
Well, my estimate, having worked in some big law firms, is that I think their legal fees were very likely to be over $1 million, possibly more than that.
And the next question would be, how does this case set precedents for other towns that might find themselves in the same situation?
Well, I think the case does set some very important precedents, finding that municipalities have to do an environmental review before they enter into a bulk water sale agreement. The different city, town, and village laws provide that bulk water sales have to have a special approval. There's a special approval, it triggers SECRA. During the case, the New York Conference of Mayors filed 2 amicus briefs arguing that this would be a terrible burden on them to have to comply with SECRA, that municipalities need to enter into water sales to get revenue. They're very financially strapped these days, and water sales are a very important source of revenue, and it would be extremely burdensome on them to comply with SECRA. So this strongly suggests that many municipalities are entering into bulk water sales and are not giving any environmental review. So I would urge people everywhere in the state to pay attention to what your city, town, or village is doing, and remember that under SECRA, if you do want to challenge it under SECRA, there's only 4 months. It's a very short time frame to put together a lawsuit. So that is important. It was also important that they decided that SECRA is not preempted by the Susquehanna River Basin Commission approval. It was also very important that they decided that it was segmentation under SECRA for them to review the lease separately from the water sale, and they invalidated the lease as well as the water sale agreement, even though they had done an environmental review of the lease, because they said you have to look at those together. So there were some, I think that the Fourth Department decision is an important decision and sets some very valuable precedents.
I'll just add a word, if I might. This has been tremendous information that Rachel has given us, and I hope it's answered a lot of your questions. But I would like to urge you not to be fatigued by these little government meetings. They could very well, if we go, if half of us went to the Painted Post meeting, they might say, there's nothing on the agenda about the water sale. And we'd all feel, oh, what did we come to this for? Don't let them tire you out. Stick with it, because if you're not a Painted Post citizen, in all rights, you don't have anything to say at that meeting. You could listen and find out what they're up to.
I don't fully agree with you on that, Jean.
Okay, well.
But that's the view that they have. I know that's
Use your head, and if she says get up and talk, that's fine. But they can shut you right down by saying, number one, this isn't on the agenda, and number two, you don't live here.
But I think, as people said earlier, they're making a decision that does affect
Oh,
Yes.
indeed, no question about it, and we can
Yeah.
throw that at them, no question about it. It does, as Michael said, it affects everybody downstream, everybody downstream, and you could say, well, I don't live in a house, but I live downstream. So just don't let them tire you out, stick with it.
I agree with that.
Okay, Beth has a question, I think.
So this case, this issue is like a microcosm of our planet's biggest issue, which is the water crisis, the fresh water crisis. My question is, are anywhere in the United States, is there a model of communities working together around water rights and understanding that it's interdependent? You know, if it settles in one place, it still belongs to them all. Is there anything anywhere that we have as a model to, as, you know, to organize it differently? Think about it?
Well, I think that, one group that is doing this is Maud Barlow's group, and I'm forgetting the name of her group, but PHE did sponsor a wonderful program where she was a speaker about a year and a half ago in Corning, and she's doing a lot of work on water as a commons and trying to create local communities that are working on making water a commons in their region. I think there's a group in Rochester, they've had her speak and they're working on that. So the work that Maud Barlow is doing is a great example. And I understand that PHE is planning a program shortly to address water as a commons and try to take that further here in our area. So that is another, I don't think they've set an exact date for that program yet, but that's something coming up to talk about that. So that's an excellent comment and observation, Beth. Thank you.
No, that's good. Okay, we probably should wrap up. It's going on 9 o'clock. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm glad some of the, thanks to Jean and Rachel especially, but everyone else that was here and spoke as well. Thank you very much for coming.